27, it establishes a subcommittee. And in Article 28, it refers to national law.
UNTAD Trade Facilitation e-learning platform was launched in February 2021, making our empowerment program for national trade facilitation committees a hybrid learning environment. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this process, moving the program to a total virtual setting for the time being. The platform has been developed with the support of international experts and is available in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. In 2021, more than 1,000 decision makers in trade facilitation have accessed the platform and honed their trade facilitation skills. Participants from 27 countries benefited from the 10 self-paced modules that for the time being are available on the platform. They include 150 videos, 60 quizzes, handouts, and further readings to support participants in their e-learning journey. Accompanying the 10 e-learning modules, 195 webinars were organized. In these virtual events, international and national experts adapt the key learned concept to each country's reality, allowing trade facilitation stakeholders to dive deeper into each of these topics and solve any doubts they might have. At the end of the course, national stakeholders are required to write a piece reflecting on a trade facilitation related issue while applying some of the concepts they have learned throughout the course. The best articles are published in our Trade Facilitation e-learning blog with a view of enhancing South-South cooperation and exchange best practices. In 2021, 659 participants have graduated from the program, with an almost equal number for women and men graduating. The UNTAD platform also works as a social network platform for trade facilitation practitioners. Committee members can connect and interact with each other using the community features of the platform. According to the final evaluations completed by the participants, 95% of participants affirm that the course has helped them significantly improve their knowledge on trade facilitation. 95% of participants affirm too that they now feel more comfortable applying trade facilitation principles and concepts in their daily jobs. After the course, 91% of participants feel in a better position to fulfill their roles as members of the National Trade Facilitation Committee. Congratulations to the program participants. Without their support, these achievements would never have been possible. Sincere thanks also to the partners organizations and experts that have supported the program. For those National Trade Facilitation Committees that have not yet participated in the program, we hope that you will join us. If you think you have learned a lot, wait to see what we are preparing for 2022. UNTAD Trade Facilitation e-learning platform was launched in February 2021, making our empowerment program for national trade facilitation committees a hybrid learning environment. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated this process, moving the program to a total virtual setting for the time being. The platform has been developed with the support of international experts and is available in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. In 2021, more than 1,000 decision makers in trade facilitation have accessed the platform and honed their trade facilitation skills. Participants from 27 countries benefited from the 10 self-paced modules that for the time being are available on the platform. They include 150 videos, 60 quizzes, handouts, and further readings to support participants in their e-learning journey. Accompanying the 10 e-learning modules, 195 webinars were organized. In these virtual events, international and national experts adapt the key learned concept to each country's reality, allowing trade facilitation stakeholders to dive deeper into each of these topics and solve any doubts they might have. At the end of the course, national stakeholders are required to write a piece reflecting on a trade facilitation related issue while applying some of the concepts they have learned throughout the course. The best articles are published in our Trade Facilitation e-learning blog with a view of enhancing South-South cooperation and exchange best practices. In 2021, 659 participants have graduated from the program, with an almost equal number for women and men graduating. The UNTAD platform also works as a social network platform for trade facilitation practitioners. Committee members can connect and interact with each other using the community features of the platform. According to the final evaluations completed by the participants, 95% of participants affirm that the course has helped them significantly improve their knowledge on trade facilitation. 95% of participants affirm too that they now feel more comfortable applying trade facilitation principles and concepts in their daily jobs. After the course, 91% of participants feel in a better position to fulfill their roles as members of the National Trade Facilitation Committee. Congratulations to the program participants. Without their support, these achievements would never have been possible. Sincere thanks also to the partners organizations and experts that have supported the program. For those National Trade Facilitation Committees that have not yet participated in the program, we hope that you will join us. If you think you have learned a lot, wait to see what we are preparing for 2022.
Thank you, Sergio. Good morning good afternoon or good evening to all our participants. Welcome on this last day of the National Trade Facilitation Committee Forum. We're really happy to be on this last day, and this afternoon for us in Geneva, we'll close with the closing ceremony. But for this morning, we have our very last session on the role of National Trade Facilitation Committees in emerging issues, simplification of procedure, cross-border cooperation, and e-commerce. My name is Malou, and before handing it over to our moderator, Alina Monica Antosi, I will just explain shortly some logistical issues. So first, you can find interpretation in English, Spanish, and French. Our speaker will be mostly speaking in English, but you can listen to the other languages easily when you click on the Zoom on the bottom with interpretation. As participants, you will not be able to unmute or to share your video with us, but do not hesitate to share with us if you have any questions in the chat. You can find easily the Q&R below in the screen, and we will transfer it to our speaker and to our moderator during or after the session. And please do not forget as well that we have a networking session starting immediately after this session, also in 3 languages, in English, French, in English, and Spanish. So do not hesitate to join us to make it a bit more interactive on this last day before we together close the forum. You can also find all the information about the session and the forum on social media. We'll share the information in the chat, but we are active on Twitter and on LinkedIn. You can also tag us with the hashtag NTFC Forum or the hashtag Trade Facilitation. And as last, as you could have seen in other session, we have the pleasure to have a live drawing artist with us who is making an illustration summary of this session, and that will be shared as well after in social media. But I think it's a nice and interesting way to sum up the session at the end. And we will, of course, spotlight and show it after every speaker, but also at the end of the session. And for now, to get to know each other, Sergio, could you please perhaps share the poll with the participants? Thank you. So now on your screen, you should see a poll that you can easily answer, and we will share with you the results also at the end of the session. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to welcome all the speakers and the moderator. And I will now give the floor to our moderator, Alina Antoshi, who is a senior private sector specialist at the World Bank. Thank you and have a good session.
Thank you, Malu, and welcome everybody. Good morning from Washington, D.C., where I'm currently based. I will make a brief introduction of the session and then give the floor to our speakers. What we've seen is that the current COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the role of the national trade facilitation committees as strong and reliable coordination mechanisms in moving trade facilitation agendas forward, with a focus on their particular role in few of the emerging issues that we will be hearing during this session today. Simplification of procedures, linkages with cross-border cooperation, as well as e-commerce. We've seen during this time that trade facilitation measures contribute to the response to the crisis by expediting the movement, release, and clearance of goods. We've seen customs and phytosanitary agencies around the world have worked together to identify critical products and designed special regimes for expedited clearance, for instance, including the facilitation of entry and clearance of some critical commodities, such as medicines, medical equipment, perishable foods. It's important that the SPS agencies in importing countries also work together with their counterparts in exporting countries. It will help them identify some key critical commodities which are produced under, say, equivalent processes. And then this will allow for the clearance controls to be reduced or even removed. At the same time, border agencies and the private sector, when they work together to undertake pre-assessments of imports through using advanced screening of documentation, it will also help identify and prioritize import activities prior to the commodity arrival. And again, government authorities, when they work together with the private sector via the national trade facilitation committees to identify any service standards or inspection procedures for critically needed items, it will help the private sector anticipate and sequence their logistics. So what is the role of national trade facilitation committees, and how can the private sector and the public sector work together to simplify those procedures and increase cross-border cooperation? Well, improved collaboration and cooperation among agencies at the borders improves the processes and procedures involved in trade. It also reduces the number of interventions required prior to clearance, particularly important during the pandemic, and contribute to expediting the movement, release, and clearance of goods. This is also a key measure of the agreement. Cooperation and communication between governments and industries through platforms such as the trade facilitation committees can also ensure that traders and regulated parties are aware of changes in regulations. However, we've seen that around the world, NTFCs sometimes are finding difficult to increase that cross-border cooperation and procedures. So increasing the availability of that trade-related information and enabling the submission of documents electronically through trade information portals or single windows will facilitate the trade and will reduce the contact between traders and officials. So this session will showcase some best practice examples on how countries are leveraging TFA measures to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. It will go in depth into the areas highlighted: simplification of procedures, focusing on e-commerce, and how to allow NTFC members to exchange those good practices. I will stop here and I will introduce our first speaker, Ms. Demita Giang. She's the Director of Customs Cooperation, Trade Facilitation, and Transit. She's also the Senior Advisor to the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Ms. Demita Giang, I know everybody has seen perhaps the speakers page. However, I would like to highlight just a few areas from her extensive experience. She was the Assistant Chief Negotiator and the head of the ECOWAS AFTA department at the Nigerian Office of Trade Negotiations. She also served in the Task Force for Trade Facilitation that later on became the National Committee of Trade Facilitation after Nigeria ratified the WTO TFA. So without further ado, Demita, I would like to invite you to make your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina, and let me thank UNCTAD and the organizers of this event for inviting me, and I'm happy to actually participate in this particular session. I will go straight to what my intervention will be. I will first of all concentrate on, dedicate the first 5 minutes or so, sit within the AFCFTA Trade Facilitation Annex within the ecosystem of other trade facilitation configurations within the multilateral system. And to do that, let me first of all lay the foundation for that. We have 54 member states that are signatory to the AFCFTA agreement, and we have 40 state parties. And out of these, our membership, only 44 are WTO member states. I'm laying this background because it will lead to the additionality that the trade facilitation annex of the AFCFTA brings to the global ecosystem of trade facilitation. And so if you do the mathematics, you will see that for trade facilitation commitments, we have 10 additional members that have undertaking commitments that would help achieve what trade facilitation goals is globally. Now, having said that, if you go to the protocol on trading goods within the AFCFTA agreement, you'll realize that Article 15 refers to the trade facilitation annex. And then if you go to the annex on trade facilitation, which is Annex 4, you will see that it places the commitments that our member states is taking within the ecosystem of commitments that they have taken elsewhere. And what this simply means is that if you go through the trade facilitation annex, you will see that all the commitments, similar commitments to what has been taken under the WTO. And then, well, while some are mandatory within the AFCFTA, they're not as mandatory within the WTO. So while, vice versa, there are a few provisions like that. But, basically overall, you will see that they are similar commitments. And so if you go to Article 26 of that particular annex, what that Article 26 brings out is that it recognizes the fact that cooperation in achieving this trade facilitation target is key, because in Article 1 in paragraph 1 of that particular article, it talks about state parties recognizing the fact that there are other activities going on elsewhere, trade facilitation related activities, instruments, recommendations on things that need to be done. And then at paragraph 2 mandates the Secretariat to actually always inform member states of these instruments, referring to things that might be going on within UNCTAD, UNECA, the WTO, the WCO, among others. And then if you go to Article 28, it talks about national committees on trade facilitation. And the language is very similar. And what it actually does say is that it mandates state parties to establish a national committee on trade facilitation, which brings me to the additionality that I was talking about. So now we have 10 additional member states that have taken this commitment of establishing a national trade facilitation committee. that wouldn't have existed within the multilateral framework because they are not members of the WTO. And then he also talks about either establish or maintaining a national trade facilitation committee, that's actually the language, or or designating an existing mechanism. Now, why I had to give this background is that to see that the commitments are not different, that this just brings a regional focus to it and then brings an additionality to it. And so having laid that background of where the AFCFTA trade facilitation instrument actually fits into what is happening globally, let me also just narrow down a little bit on how we see it from the AFCFTA Secretary. And so we are focusing on actually interoperability. Let me highlight that of systems of customs administration, and we are focusing on simplification by harmonizing the custom processes and procedures. And we are doing this taking what we call a corridor approach. And this is also now where the AFCFTA brings an additionality. So right now we are working on the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, which has 5 countries within it. And so for us to be able to achieve the interventions that we want to achieve along that corridor, we need the national trade facilitation committees of each country to be able to enhance the cross-border trade. So the AFCFTA gives us a platform to connect them, because while so for instance, under the AFCFTA configuration, because they are all our member states, we can actually facilitate the cross-border cooperation through the committees within these border posts. And so to achieve what the targets and the objectives of the AFCFTA, which we recognize cannot be achieved without trade facilitation. I mean, it's not about just removal of tariffs. If we do not take trade facilitation measures, we won't really quite be able to get to the goal, because trade facilitation is your niche solution to non-tariff barriers. So the focus that we are giving it, using the AFCFTA as a platform for our member states. Remember, I have highlighted the fact that it actually adds 10 additional members that wouldn't have been there, that are not members of the WTO yet, to what we are doing. So the focus is on how to get the customs administrations of all the 54 member states actually for their systems to be able to speak to each other. And because from the assessments that we have conducted, especially on the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, none of the systems speak to each other, but none. And it was a key intervention that came out. And in that assessment, one other key intervention that came out is actually the involvement of the national coordinating well, I've lost the word for that. What I'm actually referring to is the national mechanisms to how to help it, because to be able to connect two systems, you will need the national mechanisms of the two countries in that particular post to be able to do that. And so that's number one focus for the AFCFTA Secretariat, that in the long term, after what we are doing is done, we will be able to have connected the 54 systems. They should be able to speak to each other, irrespective of the systems they use. Just about standardizing the data so that the next border post can pick up the data, and it facilitates the transparency and helps expedite the movement when you already know what is approaching your border post. Then the next one is actually trying to, well, one of the things we were asked in the field assessment is to have a centralized documentation system, electronic system, and to come up with a single declaration. For instance, in the 5 countries that we've started this work on, they've asked if they can have a single declaration form that is simplified to an extent that it has both languages well spoken within the region, because the region has an issue with 2 different languages. And so we're also working on achieving this simplification of the documents. If we can come up with a single declaration that once you maybe goods are taken off from Ivory Coast, once the declaration has been filled, it can move all the way to Nigeria. Because what currently happens within this system is that you have to fill a different declaration form at each point. And then imagine what that means for a trader who is moving their goods along this corridor. So we are working towards that simplification and harmonization. But let me just stay at this point that whatever we are working on also is something that we intend to replicate. So it is not restricted within this region. We're just using the region as a pilot region to actually test some of the trade facilitation solutions. So whatever achievements we have along this route will be replicated. And then let me just also just say this before I conclude. For the World Customs Organization, the theme this year is all about digital transformation. And to say, because that would actually facilitate trade. And to us actually say that we are also keyed into that, because what we are doing with our tariff concessions is that we are trying to digitalize it. We are trying to produce an ASCFTA electronic tariff book, so that when we have an electronic tariff book, it has its own trade facilitation elements. It's something that economic operators can assess, and it's something that ahead of time before you move your goods, you will know what goods are allowed within the CFTA preferences. You also know the rules of origin. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alina.
Thank you very much, Damita, for that very interesting presentation. I'm sure we'll have a number of questions towards the end on using regional national approaches to trade facilitation. Malu, I believe you would like to share something before we move on to the next presentation.
Yes, thank you. If Sergio could also share the result of the poll of the participants, that could help to give an overview of who the participants are. Thank you. So as we see, the question was to give a highlight of the subject we're going to talk about today, but also to see what would be the priority of the participants. And we see clearly that digitalization and e-commerce are the key priorities of the participants. And we're lucky that the subject will be coming back in this session quite often. So thank you. And Alina, the floor is back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Malu. We also have an artist that has started a drawing just in the same that previous days, and we'll like Sergio, yes, to put it up on the screen to see what the artist has been drawing so far from our presentation during this session. It's very interesting, and I look forward to seeing also the completed art at the end of the session. I would like to move on to the next presenter. The session will be discussing e-commerce and trade facilitation. Mr. Steve Pope will be the presenter. He is the group head of trade facilitation for GoTrade, Deutsche Post DHL Group. I would also like to highlight just a few things of Steve's wealth of experience. He has been with the group for over 10 years. He's been DHL Vice President for Customs Regulatory Affairs for Europe, as well as the head of trade compliance for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He also spent over 26 years in the public sector, bringing that experience from HM Customs, Treasury, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And he also serves on various topics on customs, VAT, international trade, and various steering groups of the German and Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, as well as UNDP COVID-19 Private Sector Global Facility. So we look forward, Steve, to you sharing your expertise in this area, and I give you the floor, Steve.
Thanks, Alina. And firstly, thank you very much to UNCTAD and the organisers for the invitation, and for me to be able to join this distinguished panel on what is a really, really key topic. I've just seen 78% of the participants or attendees in this in this discussion are focusing on digitalization e-commerce. And of course, e-commerce doesn't work without digitalization. It's like, you know, at the end of the day, fuel to the engine. I just want to put this into context. Firstly, I want to touch on e-commerce and on what it really means, particularly for developed and least developed economies. And then move on to why NTFCs, National Trade Facilitation Committees, are so important. And if there was one piece of the TFA which was really groundbreaking, it was the National Trade Facilitation Committees. And the public-private dialogue is incredibly important. One would say it's key. It's businesses that trade and not governments. And NTFCs are there to exchange expertise, experience between the public and the private sector to enable countries to develop strategies and policies that optimize the opportunity within the country. And within Go Trade, our focus is on sustainable and inclusive economic growth through trade. And as we've just seen in the video just now, talking about digitalization, we still have a long way to go to make it inclusive. And I commend UNCTAD for including that as a priority, the key theme at the e-commerce week later in April. So what exactly is e-commerce and what exactly does it mean? Well, e-commerce is just a paradigm shift in trade. It's still people buying and selling, exchanging goods and services, but it's taking place online. And of course, since the advent of COVID-19, we've seen a massive change to the world of digitalization. For example, just take this panel, for example. Normally, we would be sitting in Geneva and discussing this, and the participants would be people sitting in the room. Now you can sit anywhere around the world. And Alina, you know, it's very, very early in the morning for you. It's just 2 weeks in a row that the World Bank have had to get involved in a panel at this time of the morning. So I commend you for that. But it gives us the opportunity to really, really bring people together to share our experience, to share our learning. And e-commerce, if you think about where we would be today in terms of the global economy without e-commerce, we would be in a far worse position than we are now with COVID-19. And e-commerce gives us the real opportunity to build back better. If you just put it into its simplest form, if you're a business, for example, in a developed or least developed economy, and you have a product that you want to sell, your customers are the people that will walk past your shop front or your market stall. Those are your customers. You may have customers within nearby towns and cities or in certain regions. What e-commerce does is it puts all of that on the internet for all to see. So your shop front suddenly becomes a window on the world. And if you have the right product at the right price, you can sell it to anyone around the world. And that is the big difference. It's been known as e-commerce has been called the democratization of trade, because anyone, no matter how big or small, has the opportunity to trade globally. And that was restricted previously to the people that had the capacity financially and logistically to do that. Now that is changing. And this is an opportunity. And of course, the key beneficiaries of that should be, can be, and in many cases are, small to medium enterprises and micro, small and medium enterprises. And for developed and least developed economies, this is a major point. Our forum last week, we mentioned the fact that 40% of GDP in many developed and least developed economies comes from SMEs, and e-commerce offers them the opportunity to ramp that up. But what we've seen in terms of policy change is, of course, e-commerce has been evolving at a breakneck speed. And for policy officials, that's a difficult train to keep up with. And so you need a forum, a dialogue, in order for policymakers and governments to keep up with e-commerce. And we've seen discussions around access. We've seen discussions around taxation. We've seen on the compliance issue, there's been discussions around counterfeiting, et cetera, et cetera. But principally, the main important thing for policymakers is to understand how to maximize the benefits that e-commerce brings, will bring, should bring, can bring for their countries. And I'd like to focus very much on exports rather than imports. Yeah, it simplifies customs procedures. We're talking about, very often we'll talk about imports, but of course that applies to export. But I want to focus very much on exports. I mentioned the democratization of e-commerce. And the key thing is it's bringing more players into the commercial world than we had before. It's giving men and women the opportunity to benefit from global trade. And what we need, though, is we need strategies and policies that enable those countries to be able to support their SMEs and their MSMEs, enable them to benefit and grow, accessing global markets. And of course, these new players, they come with new challenges. They don't fit the traditional mold of the dialogue between the public and the private sector in trade. They're entrepreneurs. This is all very new to them. And of course, the advantage that the National Trade Facilitation Committees offer is a platform for an exchange of dialogue and an exchange of understanding. One of the discussions we had last week, it was a discussion, mentioned the fact that the public and the private sectors speak a different language. Very often it's perceived that way, but very often it's not necessarily. It just needs a bit more of understanding. It needs the public sector to understand what the demands are for traders, but it needs the traders to understand what the demands are, what the needs are, what the requirements are for the public sector as well. At the end of the day, they're responsible for tax receipts, stability of the economy, etc. Both sides need to understand what the drivers are. For small and medium enterprises, they come with something else. They would come, and very often, with a very limited understanding of what the global economy looks like, what the global market looks like. And within the public sector, within the private sector, within such partnerships as the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, working with ITC, UNCTAD, we've seen that today, there are possibilities to educate SMEs about what's required. But at the end of the day, for a National Trade Facilitation Committee, government officials need to understand what the demands are for the public sector, for these SMEs. And an example is understanding what the rule book says. And the rule book very often was written pre-internet. And of course, it needs to adapt. So governments need to adapt their policies and their strategies to match the requirements and the demand that e-commerce brings to support those SMEs and maximize that opportunity. So for SMEs, it's an opportunity to explain to the government officials the sort of challenges that they face. Firstly, in it being able to export their goods, the bureaucracy behind it. And of course, the TFA is built around reducing red tape. But also for those countries, it's important for them to understand and hear from their SMEs as well, what the challenges that they face at the destination market, even in developed economies, that the bureaucracy sometimes is too much, it's too difficult for them to actually overcome with the limited resources that they have. And maybe that will help them from a regional perspective, as we've just heard just now from Demota, but also in the target markets that they're going. So understanding what forms of non-tariff barriers they are, explain to them the sort of rules they have. And for SMEs and MSMEs, very often they don't have the capacity to engage in a dialogue individually. So that can take place through local chambers of commerce, local business associations, but they sit around the room and can cascade what they're picking up from their SMEs. But more importantly, I think is key is if you're a developed or least developing economy, you have a golden opportunity to benefit from e-commerce, to generate growth for women and for men, because that's another advantage of e-commerce. E-commerce does not distinguish between men. It isn't prejudice. It basically puts things out there and gives everyone an equal opportunity. And a lot of research has shown that it offers incredible benefits for women as well in terms of SME. And in many countries, the vast majority of SMEs in developing economies are women. And this is an opportunity for them as well. So in wrapping that up at the end of the day is policymakers need to be informed, but they need to be assisted. The private sector needs to understand what the demands and the challenges are for policymakers, for the public sector. And it's a way of easing that burden in terms of inequalities. It's a way of understanding what the opportunity is. And national trade facilitation committees can really assist those countries to benefit from that paradigm shift. And that's all it is. It's a paradigm shift in trade, and bring more and more SMEs together to a global market and create, at the end of the day, policies and strategies that are fit for purpose. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve, for that very thoughtful and interesting presentation. You gave us a lot of ideas and food for thought on how to speed up that understanding. Some keywords there, NTFC, there are challenges, there are demands, there are needs. We need to match those and kind of come to an understanding to this new paradigm shift and the role of the NTFCs. We will also be sharing between the next speaker, the drawing. Let's see where the artist has gone to capture the discussion so far. Wow, that's pretty fast. I'm impressed. Pete, our artist, has been able to capture some of the key points of our discussion here. While you admire the painting that Pete has put together, the artist, I would like to move on to the next presentation. The next presentation, it's covering the area of digitalization. So it will talk about trade facilitation, digitalization, and the example of ASICUDA. The presenter is Mr. Constantin Ciuta. The program, he's a program management senior officer advisor with UNTAD. And of course, you all have seen perhaps his bio on the speaker's page. I like to highlight a few. He is advisor for the ASICUDA program in UNTAD. ASICUDA program is the largest technical assistance program of UNTAD and has played a major role in the modernization of the customs administrations in over 100 countries around the world, and has been in activity for over 40 years. Mr. Ciuta has participated in functional analysis design of various single window and ASICUDA cross-border, as well as e-commerce components, which he will be presenting during this session. They cover SEPCD, the portal for the Postal Customs Declaration, as well as facilitating the exchange of electronic customs information between postal operators, UPU, and customs. He will also be discussing the ASIPAP, the component of ASICUDA that facilitates the pre-arrival processing of express consignments. And finally, the digitalizing global maritime trade initiative for improving customs administration access to advanced cargo information. This will be ASIHub. So lots of acronyms. Mr. Ciuta has been working for many years with the Romanian Customs Authority. And before I give him the floor, we have a video that we would like to share with you. Sergio, thank you.
Welcome to ASICUDA, the automated system for customs data created 40 years ago by UNCTAD to improve customs clearance processes and facilitate trade in developing and middle-income countries.
ASICUDA reduces time and cost to traders, to engage in international trade. It increases government revenues, and ASYCUDA enhances the competitiveness of countries, and in fact, it contributes to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. ASYCUDA creates a level playing field in international trade for least developed countries, for landlocked developing countries, and for small island developing states.
Barbados has been using ASYCUDA since the 1990s, assisting government efforts to reform and modernize the Customs and Excise Department.
So you would have had corridors being blocked with boxes of documents. So that was a big issue for us. ASYCUDA will solve that by creating a paperless environment where now, instead of having to present paper entries to customs, officers can now access the system and through the database that is in ASYCUDA be able to access all of those entries.
The clearance of goods has been increased tremendously. Everything is done online. A broker now can stay within his home, at the beach, and his office, and all processes are done online.
The system being a web-based system, it allows 24/7 access to brokers and importers. Even within the pandemic, we were able to release goods that were of primary importance.
Operations at the Bridgetown port have also been positively impacted by ASYCUDA.
ASYCUDA is a tool that has really helped us as a port to ensure the prompt delivery of cargo once all documentation has been uploaded from the customs brokers or indeed the importers or exporters to ensure that they have cleared all duties and taxes as relates to customs. We can then deliver that cargo. So after the use of ASYCUDA, one found that many business places can now sit comfortably in their office and submit from their desk all the necessary documentation uploaded electronically into a system which was now faster, more accurate, and can give that necessary release for the delivery of cargo in a much shorter space of time.
When the comptroller and his team introduced the ASYCUDA world to the business community, we understood that it was not based upon any arbitrary type of decision-making, but one that was based upon risk management. It provides a seamless way for us to interact with the Customs and Excise Department.
Barbados signed an agreement with UNCTAD to further facilitate trade through the implementation of an electronic single window system.
The electronic single window is a project that has been spoken about for some time. The business community is anxiously awaiting it.
With the implementation of the electronic single window, it is a critical support to ASYCUDA world and the trading environment.
There are 28 government departments, some of which you would never conceive to be relevant. But these are contact points where you have to go through regulatory hurdles or administrative barriers. So we've come to the point now where we have an electronic single window, which is a space that an importer, irrespective of what you're importing, you plug into this space, and it is there then that you're able to interface with all the government departments, and they in turn with you. All of the forms and so on are moved electronically from department to department. All of the approvals that need to be done in terms of satisfying the regulatory requirements, they are done at every stage, and they can be done in real time.
The ability now to export is actually much easier, less cost, because then you don't have to be running there to these departments. I believe that the implementation of ASYCUDA world, the collaboration of UNCTAD, has transformed the Barbados economy.
ASYCUDA brings sophisticated digital technologies to the most vulnerable and the poorest countries of the world. And it creates an enabling environment for small and medium enterprises to engage in international trade. And by doing that, we are creating prosperity.
Thank you. Konstantin, please, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Alina. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and share our experience in the trade facilitation and digitalization. I have started my intervention with a short video on Asikuda in Barbados, growth through international trade that our colleague Sergio shared with us. Please allow me to move to my presentation and to share my screen. For the next part of my intervention, I will go through presentation covering two topics. First, I will present a short summary of the current technical assistant projects of the Asikuda program, focusing on Asikuda ecosystem, followed by the latest addition to the Asikuda ecosystem, the Asikuda Maritime Data Exchange and Data Integration Platform. We have seen in the previous video, as well as in the yesterday during the presentations made by representatives of Kazakhstan and Vanuatu, practical examples on how Asikuda program has contributed to improving coordination between stakeholders in trade, in particular in areas of reform consolidation and trade facilitation through extended customs and trade automation, paperless processing initiatives, enhanced interoperability and integration, and last but not least, technical and functional support, both in country and remote. And I would say the remote, it was a key element during the COVID pandemic. A few key facts about Asikuda. With more than 100 countries and territories having adopted Asikuda, the Asikuda program is UNCTAD's largest technical assistance initiative, with more than 60 operational projects. Over the past 40 years, the program assisted countries and government agencies on all continents to improve their import and export processes, including 39 least developed countries, 34 small island developing countries, and 21 landlocked developing countries. Maybe the best indicator in relation with the level of technical assistance provided by the program is the indicator that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. The project has been funded by beneficiary countries in 72% of the funding is coming from beneficiary governments. This shows also the level of trust that governments are putting into UNCTAD Asikuda program. To this day, Asikuda has partnered with more than 50 donors, international organizations, regional entities, trade associations, UN agencies, to develop single window and standalone systems to include all key actors from public and private sector in specific trade areas such as relief consignments, e-commerce, covering here both express and postal services, regional integration, biosecurity, and others. I would like to mention here just few key partners, UN agencies and intergovernmental organizations with whom we have embarked on this digital transformation journey, and specialized tools that we develop jointly with those organizations. First, it would be the e-CITES for the protection of endangered species, developed jointly with the CITES Secretariat. ASIREC, the relief consignments developed jointly with OCHA, ACPCD that was mentioned by Alina, developed jointly with UPU, and last but not least, a component that was presented also by the representatives of Eswatini in the first day of this forum, ACPM, the tool to measure performance in customs administration, tool developed jointly with World Customs Organization. UNCTAD ASICUDA program is currently involved in 4 major categories of digitalization projects. The first is digital customs, where we focus mainly on new ASICUDA world versions, including alignments with regional customs union requirements. The second is digital partner government agencies, where we develop jointly with other international organizations, and we implement solutions for permit management integrated with customs system. We focus a lot, and you will see in the second part of my presentation, on interoperability and interconnectivity, both at national and international level. Of course, in focusing on cross-border information exchange of 3 categories of data: transport, customs, and regulatory data. It's not only data exchange, but also reuse of information along the chain. And last but not least, in developing or building custom-centric single window environments. The digital solutions developed by the ASICUDA program in this context, I would mention just few of the digital solutions which are for the movement of goods and persons. First, I would highlight one that I presented. I spoke about it before. The eSite is for preventing illegal cross-border trafficking of endangered species. ASIREC for business continuity, facilitating humanitarian aid flows through efficient and managed coordination. Representative of Vanuatu presented the project as being the pilot country in implementing this. ASICUDA Postal Customs Declaration as a part of the e-commerce package for establishing a standardized framework for advanced electronic data exchange between post and customs, as to enable an efficient customs and biosecurity clearance and timely delivery of postal items. And 2 components very important from the perspective also of the National Trade Facilitation Committee. The trade data extraction developed together with WTO and ITC, which is an extraction module that aggregates and transfers tariff and trade data from ASICUDA to WTO integrated database. Information from that database is of a particular interest also for NTFCs. And last but not least, the ASIHub, the latest edition of the ASICUDA ecosystem that combines data from various providers. In the second part of mission, I will focus on ASIHub Maritime, the tool that enables maritime cross-border information exchange. ASIHub has been developed as a tool to support safe and efficient cross-border information exchange, in particular to enable shipping agent, customs, and other border agencies to gain digital access to advanced cargo information in order to further enhance risk-based pre-arrival and pre-departure processing, as stipulated in Articles 7.1 and 7.4 of the TFA. I would mention also here that without entering too much in technical details, to highlight the fact that the ASI-Hub Maritime component has been developed in the application of Article 10.3 in line with the international standards. The umbrella standards, I would say, the UNCFAT multimodal transport reference data, the World Customs Organization standards in terms of advanced electronic information, the International Maritime Organization in terms of IMO reference data model and IMO compendium, and of course the industry standard, the DCSA standards. The Digitizing Global Maritime Trade project, under which we initiated this process, is an alliance partner project of the German Federal Ministry for International Cooperation and Development, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and Merck's Trade Lens. The designated pilot countries are Cambodia and Sri Lanka. The project has two main objectives. One is the implementation of ASI-Hub data exchange and data integration platform between ASICUDA system and ship data providers system to facilitate the processing of electronic sea cargo manifest, both pre-arrival and pre-departure. And the second objective is in relation with facilitation of submission and processing of declarations, notifications, and supporting documents prior to the presentation of the goods. So what kind of formalities are envisaged under this project? There are formalities in relation with entry or exit and also clearance. In relation with entry, we cover all the formalities, the customs cargo manifest at arrival, the entry summary declaration, the arrival notification, presentation notification, and the temporary storage declaration where applicable, followed by pre-arrival processing. While on the screen it may look as separate outcomes of the project, the intention is to streamline the information exchange between ship data providers and customs authorities in order to enable this automatic data exchange from origin to the destination, with capabilities to reuse that information in order to complete all the information formalities. What kind of processes we envisage under this data exchange and data integration platform? We provide ship data providers with a complementary way of submission of advanced cargo information as to further simplify and automate the process. We enable also various actors with the facility to reuse that information in order to complete the formalities in relation with the entry. We provide also capabilities for various actors to track and trace the movement of containers, adding an additional visibility to the operations, and the capability to submit and process declarations as to fulfill all the legal requirements. One of the capabilities that have been taken into consideration in the development of this component is also to enable further enhancements as to cover other formalities such as submission of ship stores declaration, crew effects declaration, crew list, passenger list, as to complete all the requirements and all the formalities in relation with customs. Just to give you a brief information about the key events for which information is collected and disseminated. Information is collected from the time when the booking is being completed at origin, when the container is being stuffed, when the bill of lading is issued at origin, all the events in relation with gate in, gate out at the export terminal, the timestamps and the events in relation with time when the container was loaded on board of the vessel departure from the origin, and all the information about transshipments en route, including events at the destination. So the vessel arrival, planned time, estimated time and actual time, information about vessel discharge at the import terminal, import release, gate out, and all the information up to the point when the container is being stripped. So it's a chain of events in which information is shared between relevant parties in order to facilitate the completion of formalities. It's a new, I would say, holistic approach in which we don't separate the processes, and we don't cover just the entry formalities or just the clearance formalities. We look holistically at the workflows from origin to the destination, and trying to improve and to align the workflows and the processes at the entry in relation with the clearance. Expected benefits, first for the private sector through the implementation of this project. It's harmonization and streamlining the information exchange between ship data provider and customs authorities, with the direct benefit of increasing the trade facilitation, ensuring a quicker release of goods. The second main benefit is related to the simplification and automation of the process of submission of the sea cargo manifest through a system-to-system interface, with the direct benefit of reduction of the administrative burden for ship data providers. And the third main benefit is the capability to reuse data and to enable automatic reconciliation for seamless flow of information. So starting from pre-arrival, arrival and presentation, temporary storage and clearance. Expected benefits from the public sector perspective: improve coordination of border agencies in respect of controls and information exchange is what we call data pipeline to streamline border processes. Access to additional information beyond declaration data, so enrichment of customs declaration and customs manifest with external data. And last but not least, the enhanced cross-validation across data sets. So more accurate and reliable information as the information is coming from origin, and also a big data pool for risk analysis, which is the key to facilitate trade.
Konstantin, if you could get to conclude your presentation, so we can
the last slide. Thank you. Just to highlight the fact that the system is adapted also to the needs of customs and border agencies. The system can be used also in connection with mobile devices. So mobile devices can be used by both by customs and other border agencies to handle control results. You can see on the screen some examples how that information can be displayed to border agencies, and how those border agencies then they can provide their feedback in relation with control. Thank you very much. And I give the floor back to Alina. Thank you.
Thank you, Konstantin, for that very rich presentation highlighting the digital transformation journey and presenting the various modules that benefits to public and private sector. While we have the drawing artist bits, let's see how far have you gotten. I would like to introduce our last speaker for this session. She will be presenting climate change and trade facilitation, Ms. Céline Bacco. She's the Economic Affairs Officer at UNCTAD. I would like to just quickly say that Céline has been working, has a wide experience in trade, regional integration, trade facilitation. She was a focal point for Enhanced Integrated Framework, IF, for least developed countries, involved in the formulation of trade strategies, coordination of technical assistance for UNCTAD. She worked also with various UN agencies, UN Habitat, UNICEF, also has had her own consultancy firm in Tanzania. And so without further ado, I would like to ask Céline to please make your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alina. I'm actually the last of this session, and I could see that from the poll, climate change is also the last in terms of priority. So that's a challenge, but it's not surprising. And I hope that my presentation will highlight the need to think more about climate change. So let me share my screen. Yeah, can you see?
Yes, Aline, we can see.
Okay, good. So transport, trade facilitation, climate change, we have a big challenge because usually when we talk about trade facilitation, we obviously don't think about climate change. As we can see from the poll, we think about e-commerce, we think about single windows, customs clearance, but climate change is not an obvious link. But we can see that things have changed, and trade facilitation has actually a double effect on climate change. And it's one, I would say, negative impact on climate change by the fact that when we facilitate trade, it means that we actually trade more. So we increase the volume of trade, which means that we have more processes, more formalities, more time spent visiting the border agencies, more cost, and this is translated into an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So in a way, it's negative. It has a negative impact on climate change. But on the other side, what we've seen so far in the global forum, all these technologies, all these digital solutions have, at the opposite, managed to reduce the use of papers, the use of carbon-intensive resources. Because when we use single window, for instance, I mean, the former speaker, Konstantin, presented very well. A single window, we don't have to make any move to the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Trade to fill a form. It's all online. So it's all the time and the paper that are not used anymore. So we have this double effect, which is in conflict. And that's why it's very hard to measure the real impact. On one side, it's negative. We increase trade by facilitating the processes. On the other side, since trade facilitation encourage the use of technologies, we have this reduction in CO2 emissions by reducing the use of carbon-intensive resources. So it's it's not clear, it's not obvious, and that's one of the challenges that have been put aside because it's not clear. It's not very clear. So I'm very glad to say that last year UNCTAD participated into the Asia Pacific Trade and Investment Report 2021 with ESCAP and UNEP on these specific issues. And we developed a concept which is the climate smart trade facilitation. And basically, if I could sum up in a definition, it's how to facilitate the volumes of import, export, and transit goods while greening the supply chain and reducing the negative impacts on climate change. So it's like trying to achieve the two objectives, to increase trade, but at the same time to reduce the negative impact on the climate change. So I will invite you all to check the website, and we'll send you also the documents at the end of this forum to have this, to read this report where UNCTAD contributed in the trade facilitation and transport chapter. So it's very important to keep in mind that this is still very possible. It's very possible to achieve these two objectives, which seem very much contradictory. So then, what are the issues of today? Why we are talking about that now? Not only we have this climate change awareness. We see that all over the world, you know, the young people are taking the streets. There is some kind of consciousness which has been, you know, rising and mainly since the Declaration of Paris. So we have this awareness of climate change. But we see also that in terms of trade, and particularly at the multilateral level, trade facilitation has been also recognized as an engine for trade. But implicitly, what we could see in all these agreements is that trade facilitation is an engine for modernization, automation. And as I said, when we introduce technologies into the trade processes, we see that it has an impact, a positive impact on climate change. So I would say that the multilateral and even regional framework or ecosystem of trade facilitation has contributed in a way and in a very indirect way to the climate change. So we have obviously the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement that we have mentioned many times during this forum, whereby you will have many provisions encouraging technologies. So we have the single window, we have electronic payment, we have a lot, pre-arrival processing. So all of these requires to coordinate, to reduce time, to reduce also the use of papers through technologies. But we have also the PASSER, we have the RCEP from the new adopted agreement. So we have all these agreements which never mention climate change. It's never direct, it's never obvious. You don't have trade facilitation is an engine for climate change, for instance, never. Climate change is never mentioned. So that's very interesting also to mention. But indirectly, by stimulating these new technologies, these new processes, you have an impact on climate change. So obviously climate change, trade facilitation and climate change do not have a direct relationship, but an indirect. We see also that when we look at the WTO TFA, if we have a full implementation by the countries, developing countries and developed countries, there will be an increase of their trade. So again, it goes back to the first point that I was mentioning. Increase of trade, that's fantastic. They're going to be more included in the global value chain. But at the same time, it means that also it will mean it will lead to more use of papers, use of formalities, carbon-intensive resources. So we need to make sure that we offset this negative impact by modernization and automation of processes. We have also another point, which is the pressure on shipping right now. We all following the situation in terms of the freight rates, which are increasing massively like never before. And this has an impact on global trade. The prices and the impact also on the volume of global trade. We see also e-commerce. E-commerce are usually expedited shipments. Expedited shipments means planes, not vessels, usually. But planes also are a source of CO2 emissions. So we have some concerns. And trade facilitation, again, has an indirect relation with climate change, and it's not always positive. So how we can fight together to achieve a more positive impact. So we see that actually on the positive side, when we introduce new technologies, we have extreme positive results. We have, for instance, the electronic single window of Vanuatu. You remember yesterday, one of the coordinators of the single window in Vanuatu presented the single window, how it worked. And they realized that when we translate one page of paper, one paper page into CO2 emissions, we realized that by automating only two procedures into the single window, we have a reduction of 5,000 kilos of CO2 emissions. So, you know, I understand that climate change is not an obvious priority of trade facilitation. The participants here in the forum didn't come and think about climate change. No, but when you translate each document that you fill to get your customs clearance into a CO2 emission, then it starts speaking to the mind, and we realize the value of these technologies. So that's the example of Vanuatu. But we have also the trade information portals in Kenya. And again, I will refer you to the presentation of yesterday. Trade information portals in Kenya not only increase the transparency aspect, which is a fundamental principle of trade facilitation, but also simplification. And at the end of the day, same, when you put all the documentation in the online in a system, then you reduce also a lot of processes and steps, because when a procedure is documented online, then you see that there are duplications.
If I can just quickly ask you to get to conclude, so we can get some Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'll finish. So when you document a procedure online, you can simplify when you see that there is duplication, or when you see that some procedures can be put online or digitalized. And this has contributed into the elimination of 64 documents and 69 hours. So translate again into CO2 emissions and you have a massive result. So what we see is that, as a conclusion, we have to make the processes more efficient by including the concept of climate change into our way of doing business, by introducing technologies. I'm not saying that technologies will solve the issues, because again, to use single window, for instance, will spend on energy. So that's another issue. But still, now you have to think about the linkage between trade facilitation and climate change as an indirect but very, very effective relationship. I have some policy recommendations, which is more about national and regional policy recommendation for governments to include more processes, more digital solutions in the processes, to include, and insert trade, climate change into the agreement on trade facilitation, so that now we count on it as a major issues related to trade facilitation. And I finish with this picture for Vanuatu, so we can finish on a very good and sunny note. Thank you very much, Alina.
Thank you, Celine, for those very challenging, I think, topics that always we try to strike a balance between trade facilitation, also climate change. I would like to open the floor for questions to our panelists. They are here. You can also pose your questions in the chat room, in the Q&A. While we go through them, I would like to take one of them from the Q&A chat room. What is your approach, from Hussein Garbi? What is your approach on the interoperability of e-payments? Do you think that posts can help in e-commerce to facilitate digitalization and to give access to MSMEs through some initiatives like e-export project or other platforms? If any of the speakers would like to perhaps take a shot at answering this question.
Yeah, I could give a slight answer to it.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm not a financial expert, but one of the things that we have seen is electronic payments, and in particular mobile payments have been huge facilitators for SMEs. If you take, for example, mobile payment platforms like M-Pesa, they definitely make a difference. Financing of SMEs is a big issue, and it's something that needs addressed. And we're talking to a number of partners at the moment about how that can be done. When I say partners, I mean international organizations. I don't mean financial institutions. But yeah, I do think it would at least help.
Thank you. I see one other question that perhaps I will pull in a moment from Ahmed Iftikhar. He says, I believe the bigger players and bigger countries still have an advantage, as the necessary legislations are still lacking in developing an LDCs countries, and the online payment system is not available in these countries. So I would like to give the floor to our speakers to see if you have any views on that, on the legislative requirements.
Yeah, maybe I can turn it around slightly. We've stuck in one area, but I think, one of the things to look back on is what I mentioned about the democratization of trade, and talking about, in the traditional model, it was the larger companies that were able to engage in discussions with governments on policy and legislation, etc., etc. We used to have public consultations when I was still in the UK government. So the advantage that NTFCs bring is that they do offer a voice for SMEs. And as I mentioned, not every SME has the capacity, either financially or in terms of operationally, time-wise, to engage in long-term dialogue or, with governments. But through various associations, through the NTFCs, they do have access, or they should have access now, and their voice should be heard. So there, I think that is one of the key advantages of the NTFCs, is that it does support this democratization of trade, which we're looking at, and was mentioned earlier in the UNCTAD video about the inclusive nature of trade.
Thank you, Steve. I also would like to pull another question while we are sorting through them, and please feel free to enter them and also send us directly to the email in the email link for UNCTAD. Somebody says, I never saw that link between trade facilitation and climate change. So thanks. And another following the question from Mr. Khan says, very relevant points on trade facilitation and climate change, especially decarbonization and offsetting. We need to look at other angles of trade procedures, impact on waste management, water usage, etc. I guess this question perhaps it's for you, Celine. So if you'd like to make any comment.
We're starting that work, and I'm glad to announce that we're also doing it with UNESCO, working together on measuring the impact for each procedure. That's something that we will also do with ASYCUDA, for instance, to have some kind of automatic measurement of the customs clearance processes by CO2 emissions. We need to have this translation. Once the translation into CO2 emission is agreed, then we could translate everything, and that will be easy to have this picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. And perhaps, I have another question for Dimitar. I wonder if you can give us a sense of the challenges of regional implementation and how to align with the global nature of the trade facilitation agreement. I know you've given some hint in your presentation between the regional, the national, but if you can give a little bit of more sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the objectives of the AFCFTA is actually to solve some of these complexities because it provides a new platform where you can feed from the national to the continental. And that's the advantage it brings on board without neglecting what is already existing in the regional configurations. And so this part of the arrangements or institutional arrangements of the AFCFTA is this subcommittee on customs cooperation, trade facilitation, and transit that brings together all the member states into one room where the initiatives of trade facilitation, where the commitments of trade facilitation are discussed and owned by member states. So it actually all does fit in. So starting from the national, some of the member states belong to regional configurations that also have trade facilitation elements, and then it fits into the continental. So so through that committee, we are at least able to have a bird's eye overview of what is happening within the national governments and within the regional economic communities that are also statutorily part of any of our institutional meetings. And just to say a little bit about payment systems, I'm sure members know that the AFCFTA together with Afreximbank launched the Pan-African payment system that would actually help facilitate the exchange of trade, and goods and services through the payment systems platform that allows you to buy in your own regional currency from any destination buyer. So you buy in your currency, and the person who you're buying from receives the money in his currency. And this is actually one of the major achievements so far for the FCFTA. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Dimitar. And perhaps before we move to Malou to conclude the session, I just wanted to ask also Steve a question from myself. So Steve, do companies like DHL, how do they track the emissions for the digitalization activities? I mean, and how does that compare with transport dimension, which is the one that we see most commonly? Thank you.
Yeah, it's the environment is a big issue for us, and we have a program which I hope Celine knows called Go Green, and we're looking at measuring things. And trade facilitation, there's another element within trade facilitation, Celine, which I'd like to offer to you. And you mentioned the delays. Obviously, trucks sitting there, engines turning on, pumping out carbon dioxide. one of the things that we looked at as well, we worked on a trade facilitation program in one of the countries where the delays were such that we had to do 2 deliveries a day. And by implementing simplified procedures, we went down to 1. So we halved CO2 emissions just with that one program. It was a quick and easy one, very easy. But I think one of the interesting things is, I think it still is, but the most popular article ever that involved DHL was when we announced that we were buying these electronic aircraft that we're having, which we announced, I think it was in October. But we have big programs on the environment. We're involved in a lot of things. There's the normal well-known ones like planting trees and involved in that. But if you remember, Deutsche Post made the jump in with electronic vehicles for the postal service and courier deliveries, and we actually started manufacturing. So in terms of really trying to push the line, I think Deutsche Post DHL has shown a lot in that, and it is an ambition of ours to measure what we're doing, not just against climate change, but in SDGs in general. With the Go Trade program, for example, we want to be able to measure exactly, the good that we're doing. Are we doing the right thing on the ground? Are we making a positive benefit in all areas? Poverty reduction, education, welfare, etc. Is what we're doing actually adding to moving the dial on the SDGs in the right direction? So it's a big issue for us. I don't know enough about it personally because it's not my area of expertise, but Go Green and what we're doing is a big issue for us, Alina. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Steve. Very encouraging, and thank you to all the speakers for this session. I would like to pass on to Malu. Some of the questions, by the way, have been answered in the Q&A question. I see Constantine has responded to some of the technical Asikuda questions. Malu, I will pass on back to you. Thank you, everyone.
I will 1 minute over time, so I will be really quick to close this session as the networking session are coming. But with the UNCTAD team, would like to thank the moderator and the speaker for this session. I think it was truly interesting, especially to see all the questions that came from the climate change and trade facilitation linkages. So it's interesting. In 2 years, we'll perhaps in the next forum ask the same question and then compare the results. Will be interesting. But thank you so much for all the interesting presentation about Asikuda, from Stephen on DHL, about more trade facilitation, and the FCFTA from Demita, and as well, Alina, for moderating the session within the time, only 3 minutes over time. That was great. And thank you to all the participants as well to participating. I see that we will still have 230 participants on the last day, so this is great. And we invite you to the networking session now in English, French, and Spanish, and you can see all the link in the messages. And Sergio, I don't know if you are already doing it, but could you please also share the illustrative summary of that Pete has done for the session? You can also find it on social media, on our Twitter as well. And for the participants, could you please also answer the poll that is now coming on your screen? Thank you, to help us to have a good evaluation of the session. And last but not least, in 2 hours, so at 3 p.m. Geneva time, we'll have our closing session with speakers from UNESCAP, the VTO, the World Bank, UNCTAD, the ITC, UNACE, and others, and the OECD as well. So please join us for the closing session. We'll be curious to hear more about your views. You can always use the chat. And we all invite you now to the networking session. And thank you again to the moderator, Alina, and to all the speakers for this great last session. It was a great closing of the session of the forum, especially now focused on the emerging issues. Thank you again, and I hope to see you this afternoon or now in a few minutes in the networking session. Thank you.